show with me, Chris Goodrum. Right, okay, as I said probably last week and the week before, it's that kind of time of the year where episodes of the show get a little bit sporadic due to work and other factors. So I'm guessing it's probably unlikely that we're going to hit the 200 mark before the end of the year. So it'll probably be sort of sometime in January before we get to that landmark, which will be nice. So anyway, today's episode of the show, what are we looking at? We're looking, well, okay, if I was to say Seattle to you, what would that conjure up? I mean, I guess a number of you might say, Seattle Seahawks, the American football team. Some of you might go, well, birthplace of grunge, you know, Nirvana, etc., etc. Some of you that might think a little bit more obscure might go, KACL, talk radio. Yeah, the penny probably hasn't dropped. Well, if you're like me, a big fan of Frasier, which I think is probably one of the best sitcoms that on television, or was one of the best sitcoms on television, you know that the eponymously named Frasier Crane was the resident psychiatrist on that particular radio show, so or radio channel, I should say. So. Anyway, but we're not talking about all of those. We're talking about the Westland Distillery, which is a relatively new distillery that's been built in Seattle. I believe construction started sometime around about 2010 and was producing spirit 3 years later, and is now available on the UK market. And quite interesting it is too. Why is it interesting? Well, unlike a number of these new sort of start-up distilleries or craft distilleries or whatever you want to call them, they've decided not to go down the bourbon route. They're not doing the standard kind of corn, rye, etc., mash bill, and they decided to, or should I say, the master distiller Matt Hoffman has decided that they're going to concentrate on single malt whiskey. He's been a big fan of single malt whiskies for donkey's years, and seems to have taken a lot of inspiration from Bruichladdich with regards to the whole. He's a big fan of, or believer, should we say, in the whole terroir concept. And from what I've read about him and the distillery, they obviously seem to think that in Washington State they've got ideal conditions for growing barley. Lots of small farms that produce high quality barley, and no doubt they're probably doing sort of something very similar to Bruichladdich in that they're maybe distilling individual farms and things like that. That's probably something that's in the pipeline, I would imagine. And the thing is, with, like I've said before about, you know, American distilleries and worldwide distilleries, they're not hamstrung by the Scotch Whisky Association, so they have the freedom to play around, try some interesting things, and there seems to be a sort of cross-pollination of ideas between not only the craft distilling industry but the craft brewing industry as well. And certainly the Westland Distillery seems to be no different to that, in that it uses a number of different malts. It uses a selection of malts including Washington Pale, Munich, Extra Special, Brown Malt and Pale Chocolate Malt. So they're taking the whole concept of single malt whiskey and adding a sort of a, you know, distinctly American slant to it, which is fine by me. It's, at the end of the day, it's, you know, what's in the glass is what counts. So you can have all the sort of wonderful gimmicky ideas and fancy distilleries and state-of-the-art labs and all that, but if what you're producing and bottling is A, not particularly good quality, and B, too young, then, and C, charging an arm and a leg for it, then of course, you know, it's all for nothing. But obviously we will get to the tasting in due course. So, like I said, it seems to me that from what I've been reading, this this Matt Hoffman chap is saying all the right things, seems to be influenced by all the right things, and is hopefully creating some interesting whiskies. And we've got three of the what they've called their core range to taste this afternoon. So I'll just introduce the lineup then, shall I? No one can make me stop. Okay, so we're going to kick off with this one, the American Oak Single Malt. This has been aged for approximately 24 months in a combination of refill American Oak and brand new casks. The brand new casks are specifically air dried, and I don't know what the char level is, but they're obviously, got access to lots of good wood, so hopefully this will be quite an interesting one. This is their kind of flagship, and I think I read in an interview somewhere that Matt said it's his favourite of the range that they're doing. Like I said, it's local barley with using this combination of different malts. So different malting techniques could be interesting. Could be a little bit messy, possibly, using all these different malts, but again, we'll see when we get to taste them. The second one we'll be looking at is their Sherrywood single malt. This is the same malts, except it's been aged in ex-Oloroso and ex-Piedra Ximenez casks for roughly about the same period of time, 24 months. So that could be all sherry and no trousers, but we shall see when we get there. And finally, the last bottling in this series is the Peated single malt, which is really nice to know that they're doing something with peat. Although this, I don't think, is made from local barley. I think this is basically Scottish barley, which I imagine is obviously peated to 55 parts per million in Scotland and probably shipped over. And again, this is aged for around about 24 months in new and first fill American oak. So not very old spirit, so it will be interesting to see whether it's picked up some complexity, whether it's got that kind of maybe aggressive youthful character that a lot of young spirit actually has. And well, I guess we'll just have to kick off with the American oak bottling then. So let's see what the nose gives us on this one. Right, a lot of oak. So if you like your bourbons, this is definitely going to appeal to you. It's got lots of toasty, dark, almost slightly molassy notes. There's a nice bit of citrus, a little bit of tangerine, orange, and a lot of chocolate. A lot of chocolate malt. The chocolate malt seems to be quite dominant, and it's got that slightly sort of herbally edge to it. It actually sort of reminds me of a little bit more refined version of the bottling or the spirit that was produced by Blue Monkey here in Nottingham, again, which was essentially just a distilled beer that they produced, and it has that, I wouldn't say it has that sort of beery kind of character, but obviously with the chocolate malt sort of standing out, it has that sort of dense, malty, robust kind of character, but there is a nice fresh element happening, and I believe that their warehousing is in, I'm probably going to pronounce the name of the place completely wrong if I can find it, somewhere out on the coast, Hoquiam? No, I don't really know Seattle that well, but anyway, so I'm guessing that there's a little bit of coastal influence coming through on this, a little bit of saltiness, and a nice, and like I say, it's got a nice citric freshness. It is certainly not one-dimensional, although the oak is quite dominating. But yeah, this appeals to me. I quite like this. I think this is pretty impressive, and considering this is under 3 years of age, or probably there or thereabouts, it's actually remarkably soft, and there's no real faintiness. I mean, obviously, I'm guessing that they've got fairly sort of tallish sort of stills, maybe, that produce a fairly sort of a lighter kind of less congener heavy kind of spirit. So yeah, nice nose. Let's see what the palate gives us. Well, it's a bit dry. Really herbal, really intense. Chocolatey, malty, plenty of dark, treacle, wood, little bittering on the finish, that sort of little bit of sort of oak character is starting to bitter a little bit, but it's certainly got plenty of malt and treacly notes to kind of compensate and balance up. Very herbal, but not in a kind of rye-like herbalness. It's more in a kind of Langerton kind of herbalness, almost kind of Provençal-y sort of herbalness. And that chocolate malt really lingers. I mean, that is really quite impressive, it has to be said. Yeah, I like that. That's really quite interesting, I think. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Sherrywood. Let's see what the nose gives us on that then, shall we? Cask influence again is very obvious. It's very grapey, it's winey, treacly, sort of with a little bit of sort of burnt toast possibly. Again, there's a smidgen of kind of chocolate maltiness, there's a little bit of citrus, but there's more coffee, more licorice, more of the dark grapey PX character coming through. But again, it's got a lovely freshness to it, and very clean as well. No off notes whatsoever. Maybe a little bit of maple syrup possibly. It's quite sweet, but again, you know, nicely balanced, I think. So let's see what the palate gives us. Softer, fuller, less of the bitterness of the American oak, more treacle, more sort of burnt raisins, grapey PX, little bit of herbal oloroso coming through as well. Quite nicely balanced, I think. Not quite so herbal on the palate, although it does kind of come through on the finish, along with that bit of citrus and an almost kind of salty freshness as well. Yeah, impressive. It has to be said. I mean, it's balanced. Yes, it's very much cask orientated, but you know, I think if that's kind of like the sort of whiskey that you like, then that's going to tick some boxes, so to speak. And finally, on to the peated malt. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Straight off the bat, crisper, cleaner, fresher. Not to say that that the other two were dirty, but it has that sort of fresh, crisp, clean barley, uncluttered, I think was a word that sort of sprung to mind when I initially tasted this. It's a little bit sort of youthful at the edges. There's some nice floral, slightly heathery, peaty notes. There's a little bit of medicinal as well. Some lovely fresh barley. This is more typical, I guess, of a Scottish whisky. Well, bearing in mind that, like I said, it's basically peated Scottish barley. You would kind of expect that. Again, for sort of, you know, a relatively young whisky, it's surprisingly rounded, pleasantly aromatic, with just a smidgen of oak. I mean, I would guess from this nose that the bulk of it, I would have thought, has been refill American oak with maybe just a little bit of first fill. Well, certainly that's how it kind of comes across. Like I said, it's a lot more barley focused, less about the wood, although the oak is definitely there, sort of just in the background. Yeah, this is nice. This is really good. Let's see what the palate gives us. That's lovely. Again, more barley focused, with a bit of heatheriness, a bit of sort of dusty peat, a little bit of medicinal notes, tobacco, smoke, little bit of saltiness, a little bit of meatiness possibly as well. But again, really clean, really focused, not a huge amount of oak. Again, it does seem to give the impression of predominantly being aged in refill casks rather than brand new casks. It's certainly not the bitterness right on the finish. It's got a lovely softness and really evolved for, like I said, for such a young spirit. I think that is absolutely superb. I think that's I think that is my favourite of the three in actual fact. I mean, but I'll sum that up in just a second. Right, okay, so let's sum up today's episode. So short and sweet, as they say, but you know, I thought it would just be nice just to sort of focus on this one particular distillery and just give it all the attention rather than doing three of this and three of something else. You know, it will gets a bit muddy. The American oak, I think, let's be honest, quality-wise, I've got absolutely no issue at all with. I love the experimental nature of it. I love the interesting use of different malts. I think maybe it could do with a little bit more time. There's a little bit of bitterness on the finish, a little bit maybe too much fresh American oak. I can see where they're going with this. You know, it's certainly trying to appeal to the American market. It's certainly trying to appeal to sort of like the bourbon drinkers to say, hey, look, you know, here we have a product that has a kind of a connection to you, but it's different as well. And you know what, I really like that. I think that's really, really interesting. I think and for, you know, for such a young spirit, that is really pleasant to drink. Really very, very nice. The Sherrywood, again, as you know, this is not going to be my totally preferred style of whisky, certainly not young sherry matured malt. But in saying that, there is a nice balance to it. There is, again, some of the malty character does come through all that sort of sherry oak. Again, I think it's obviously, you know, marketing, you know, for the person that sort of likes that style of whisky. And I think if you like young sherry matured whiskies, I think this has got a lot going for it. It's balanced. It's got some pleasant character aside from all the Sherrywood, and yeah, it again really quite interesting. So not got an issue with that at all. Peated one, I think, is certainly my favourite. I mean, like I said, it's got more of a Scottish kind of feel. It's less cluttered. It's more focused. It's fresher. It's crisper. I think I would like to see their spirit just aged in refill American oak. I would like to get more of a kind of idea of the distillery character, certainly using the local barley and things like that. Again, it kind of comes down to the whole Bruichladdich terroir concept. It's a case of, well, if you're going to use local barley from different farms and things like that, you really shouldn't be sticking it in sort of like brand new oak, because it's just going to be too dominant. And what you should, I think, what would be a better way of doing it, again, is probably using a single malt varietal. Use the single strain of barley, malt it in exactly the same way, rather than mixing up your maltings and things like that. It's, again, if you want the terroir to come out, the ideal thing to do is do as little to the barley as is humanly possible, so you get all that character come across. And I would love to see what the character of the distillery is, and I'm sure that they're going to sort of carry on and do interesting things. I think I mean, I read that, I think it was pretty much just the other day that Remy Cointreau's announced that they've purchased the distillery, so hopefully they will be going down the kind of Bruichladdich route of just letting the distillery get on with what it's doing, because obviously what it's doing is commercially good, shall we say, otherwise Remy wouldn't have spent whatever millions they've spent on it. So I think it will be probably in good hands. I imagine that we'll see more of it in the UK possibly, and influx of cash is going to sort of allow it to sort of try out more interesting things, and hopefully that they will do so, because I think what they're producing is really interesting. You can purchase this little selection, this tri-pack, shall we say, of 3cl bottlings. 3cl bottlings, what am I talking, 20cl bottlings. I don't think I've got it up on the website as yet, but we've certainly got some stock. And it's in the shop at $69.95, something like that. Be a little bit cheaper online. So if you're interested in trying something a bit different, or you want to buy a Christmas present for somebody that likes their whiskey, but you want to give them something a bit more challenging, something a bit different, then I think this is a really nice buy. So yeah, there you have it. That's this week's episode of the show. I'm not quite sure when the next one will be, given that time of year. Hopefully I'll have the opportunity to maybe squeeze one more in before the Christmas period. But if I don't, and I hope you all have a wonderful Christmas. Hope you have some great whiskies on Christmas Day. So all I have to say is good afternoon and good Dram.